It doesn't measure the well-being of our children, the happiness of the children, the well-being of our families, the strength of our families, the things that we really value. It doesn't measure.
Welcome to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Pleasure to have you join us again. For those of you who don't know us, well, of course, we're the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation, representing tens of thousands of people from all faiths and none who think that man-woman marriage is important and distinct and that it should be promoted and celebrated. Not that other things don't take place in a liberal democracy, of course they are, but we think that the man-woman thing for life brings about something special, not least the best version of the next generation of children. The evidence is absolutely clear that growing up with your married mum and dad is more likely to bring about best outcomes for children. And part of those best outcomes is the ability of mums to spend time in the very early years raising their children, and the importance of that, and the importance of that not just to the marriage and to the mother and to the child, but also to society. And it's a pleasure to talk to Anne Fennell. Anne is heading up an organisation called Mothers at Home Matter. Really important organisation in my book, and I think in most people's book. And we're going to have a chat today about something which is changing in terms of government provision on the 1st of September. I wonder if you could tell us what's changing and why it's of interest to you.
Yeah, well, the government are just bringing in a new scheme or funding scheme. They're extending the scheme they already have to include childcare subsidies for babies at 9 months. So for any parent that works. So it's an exclusive scheme for parents who want to go to or who need to go to work so that their child from 9 months to 2 years can have access to daycare, but there's no support for any other choice.
By any other choice, you mean it's money for government approved daycare services, but actually, if you want to pay somebody who you trust and know, that's not an option to you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is in terms of childminders, but if you want to do it yourself, which many mothers
Mm.
do, that's not
Mm.
an option, or certainly it's not subsidised or helped in any
Yeah.
way.
So what's wrong with that? I mean, let's say actually it's good for kids, for parents to go out and get lots of money so they can buy them lots of things. So isn't this the government doing something great?
Well, yes, families are struggling. Many families are struggling with the cost of living and the fact that houses are so expensive and people need two incomes to survive. So most of us, the average family, can't afford to survive on one income. So yes, families do need help, but pushing both parents out to work has been the model for quite a long time, and this is almost a final nail in the coffin for anyone wanting to make the choice to be home to care. But it's not necessarily what's best for the child. In fact, actually, the best outcomes for a child are a good home environment, stable relationship of the parent, and sort of an engaged caretaker, and basically someone who loves them. And most mothers want to do that. There are fathers who'd like to do that, but it's a continuity and consistency of care, and moment by moment nurturing, soothing. Because when they're babies, they do need intensive care. They are basically dependent on us.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
and so no, this childcare subsidy, and I think the important thing about this daycare thing is that it's coming from the wrong place. The original motive is not about what is in the best interest of the child. It's what is in the best interest of the labour market.
Yes, and that's the big thing, isn't it? It's all about GDP. It's all about actually we need to, as a country, increase our GDP. That means we need to get mums, and we are talking about mums, out to work as soon as possible. And on the other side of the coin, of course, that means that yes, the state or the state-appointed care agency will take care and raise your child. And then we have this situation where you've got this wraparound childcare situation. Somebody, you drop your child off first thing in the morning, somebody else gives them breakfast, or they go to a preschool breakfast club, they go to school, another organisation may pick them up from school and then take them and entertain them until you grab them after a long day's hard work when you and your husband or your wife might be frustrated, and you take them home and put them to bed. And under those circumstances, you've got to ask yourself, who's actually the parent?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, who do you want raising your baby or your child? And those first few years of life, particularly the first 2 to 3, are absolutely critical in terms of development, and not cognitive development particularly. It's the emotional development, it's the nurturing of the soul, of the being. That comes before the cognitive stuff. And to be able to give the cognitive stuff, you want the child to be in a secure, stable place, just loved, really. Babies just need
Yeah,
love.
yeah. And you can't buy love from the state.
No,
That's not how that works.
it's for 30 hours a week, for 30, weeks in the year. It's not really what parents need in terms of those who are really working, who need to work. But it's forcing people into a particular direction, and at a particular time, and sort of, 9 months of age is a particularly critical time where they start to recognize that they have a caregiver, and they recognize that relationship with their mother.
And this isn't your opinion, is it? Because so both of us are familiar with the work of Erica Komisar and her wonderfully sad book, Being There. My wife and I read that book, and honestly, it brings you to tears on the one hand, when you read about what's happening with attachment theory and what it actually points to in society when you look around and you speak to anybody involved in the education system, and they say, yeah, that's the consequences are exactly what we're seeing in the school system. And it's evidence-based, and it's well-documented research that talks about these things. It's not just somebody's opinion. And it's important. So why doesn't the government appreciate this, do you think?
To answer that last question, the Treasury has an agenda, and that is to see growth of GDP, but also it has a perceived need of the labour shortage is a perceived need, and this is one way of getting people into work. The real problem is you don't really want to be paid to look after, but you need supporting.
Yes.
We've been pushed to a point where we absolutely have to be supported now because
Yeah.
because of the economic situation, but it doesn't feel right to be paid to do something you love doing.
It's a catch 22, because then you'll get people saying, hold on, why should we give them money because they've had children? And you may even have people having more children in order to get the money, which actually, looking at our birth rate, wouldn't be a bad thing.
In terms of taxation, at some point you always recognise that, I suppose, you have to see what's a good thing, and then you try and support it, don't you? And not tax out of existence, which is what we're doing at the moment.
And I suppose at the end, the government's only interest in family should be because it's the next generation, and they should be looking to raise the best version of the next generation and how they can get involved and nudge towards that. And the idea that actually the whole of that burden should be borne by the parents, and then the whole of the subsequent tax earnings of the individual goes to the government, you think, well, that doesn't sound very right to me neither. The government's going to get a lot of money out of a well-adjusted child working for 50 years. Actually, why don't they contribute to that turnout, as best as it possibly can be right at the beginning, if they can support and help people?
The new policy coming in doesn't actually make economic sense in terms of it's really for a middle class, sort of lower class sort of audience, and the money that they're going to get back in terms of tax receipts is not going to cover the cost of the nursery care. Plus, mothers are going to have to subsidise that because they have to cover holidays, and it's never going to be enough, and it's never going to be satisfying enough because it's just not enough hours, and it's just it's not sort of good enough. The funding is just not good enough for the quality of care that you need, really.
But GDP looks good, so let's carry on doing it, hey? And that's the thing. We've got to try and address this. GDP is everything, and anything that makes GDP look better is something we must go for. And I don't know, the Treasury seems to have an awful lot of say, and perhaps that's one of the problems here.
It doesn't measure the well-being of our children, the happiness of the children, the well-being of our families, the strength of our families, the things that we really value. It doesn't measure.
Absolutely right. There's more to life than money. You're so true. Yeah. You raised quite rightly the idea that mothers, given the choice, would rather stay at home and look after their children. Now, sometimes the narrative we hear in the media is not that, but the evidence, if you look at the peer-reviewed research base, it says that is in fact the case.
Yes. I mean, a lot of our mothers obviously would like to be home more with their children. Many feel
Mm,
they can't, many feel that they have to go to work to provide an income,
mm.
to pay the bills. I think it really needs to be as a choice with other choices available as well.
So, what would some of those choices? I mean, what alternative things would you want the government to do to make it more of a choice instead of an obligation?
Well, if you were really going to put the child at the heart of your policy, you would look to either help mothers or a carer be at home. It's a home environment and it's a consistency and continuity of loving care. A very, very good high quality childcare, which is sort of more or less one to one when they're babies or 1 to 2 to 3, is very expensive because it's so intensive. So what you might want to help subsidize that for people. But the kind of public universal childcare can never be really high quality because firstly, it's not funded well enough. We don't have the infrastructure. We've got a lot of very high turnover of young staff. It's, the job itself is very physical. I mean, that's the sort of superficial level of what it is, but at heart, it's that love and it's that connection and it's moment by
Mm,
moment looking at your
mm.
baby, smiling, nurturing. Erica talks about mothers being the central nervous system of baby in terms of regulating their emotions, not going too high, not going too low, being a buffer and really providing a stress-free environment as one can for the first couple of years until those sort of basic foundations are laid.
Brilliant. And this isn't your ideologically chosen position. This is, well, it is based on personal experience, but actually it's backed up by rigorous scientific research in terms of child outcomes. It's very, very clear. I would direct people to Erica Commissar's book again, just to go and have a look at the extensive research she lists. We could go through it, but she does it so much better. And have a look at that because it makes a difference to how the child grows up, to how the child integrates in society, performs in society. There are significant outcome differentials. But like you said, the problem is the cost of housing and everything else in our country. Some parents have no option but to have to go out to work. Is there any, how can we console, if any way, is there anything we can say for those parents who don't want to leave their children but actually have to because they can't afford the mortgage if they don't, or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think Erica also talks about how you mitigate against that. I think you realize what you're losing out and what the baby's losing out. So when you do come home, you've got to sort of almost put down everything else and give the baby as much attention as you can. If there is any way you could be more at home or work from home, or it's really having a presence there, really, or finding maybe a childminder who's in a home environment. Just generally, I think we need to push in society for a much more sort of holistic and looking at the family as a whole rather than as mothers and fathers as individuals. I think that's one of the other problems of the narrative of like the motherhood penalty and gender equality. We're looking at fathers competing with mothers for how our parents, but actually, as a family, you're working together, aren't you?
And that historically would have always been the case. Mothers and fathers would have worked from the home in an industry environment, way before industrialization, and both helped out with all sorts of tasks.
I'm really happy to take a few years out of work to be able to concentrate on the family for a couple of years. And I'm very happy to support my husband to work a bit harder to support us. And then as time goes by, he will, the roles change. It doesn't have to be stuck like that. Or it could be the other way around. But just to say that this is the way that this is the only way we're going to support, everyone, both of us going back into work. We could treat the family much more as a unit. We could have more transferable tax allowances. We could tax the family less as well.
Well, yeah, tax the family. Yes, and do not have a benefit system which almost persuades people not to live together with both parents, which makes no sense at all. And there are lots of things, and not least, actually, and depending on how you look at the figures, there are some reports that if you take the childcare budget and divide it by the number of children using it, it comes out to about £14,000 per child. That's a lot of money. If you gave that to mums, maybe they wouldn't have to go out to work in the first place, and maybe kids would be raised much, much more well-adjusted and integrate and interact in the school system. We had a report around the beginning of the year that the child readiness report in schools, and a third of our children are not ready for school. They don't know how to integrate. They don't know how to listen, to talk, to behave, to use the toilet, because they haven't been parented, because they've been sent out to state-run institutions by paid individuals who are just trying to get through the day. And I know some of them will be trying the best they can and doing the best they can. But like you say, it's not the same as a loving parent or guardian, is it? And again, it's kind of short-sighted on the government's part, I think, because if we gave some of that money to give mums the choice, if you want to stay at home and raise the child for the first couple of years yourself, this will help you do that.
Well, there's probably a couple of things in that. Just in terms of the 9-month policy, it is going to cost £13,000 per child per year just for those for that. And then you've got all the huge infrastructure costs, and they're not in place at the moment. So that is another cost. I think we're spending over 9 billion. And you don't need to even give all that money to mothers. It could be a fraction of that. I do think we're losing confidence in parenting as well. So I think we do also need to invest in supporting parents. So there are probably many children at home who may also not be school ready, but I think we've lost our confidence in parenting. And I know a lot of studies with James Heckman. I don't know if he's a economic Nobel laureate, but he's done a lot of work in child development at the Harvard Center of Child Development. He's saying for a fraction of the cost. So he's done various experiments and quite a lot in terms of early years intervention. But where you support the parents to parent, it's much more cost effective. So you actually sort of give them back their self-esteem, tell them what they're doing is valuable. Once you realize what you're doing is valuable, you're more likely to invest in your own children.
That's really, really interesting. That's another whole other aspect of the way we look at and champion parenting. And that actually, it touches on thorny subjects, biology matters, the fact that, it's good if you look after your own child as opposed to getting somebody. I think that the government rhetoric seems to be it doesn't really matter. As long as you've got a responsible person paid for by the state, it doesn't really matter. But it turns out it does.
I think it does matter.
Yeah.
If anything, we want to do it.
Yeah.
Also, we are losing confidence in ourselves. And I mean, Erica says that I don't know how true it is, but she does say it's possible to lose a maternal instinct. And I work also on a European level, and I work very closely with a lady from Sweden, and she feels very much that as a sort of nation, they're losing this sort of maternal instinct.
Well, I wonder what else we can do. One of the issues is it then becomes very complicated. If we redefine everything and recategorize everything and everyone's the same and it doesn't make any difference, it then becomes very complicated for a government to say, actually, we want kids to stay home with their biological mums, because that's actually contrary to other messages we're pumping in society, which is that it doesn't matter if the people that are raising you are biologically connected or not. You can do what you want. Anything goes, but the evidence kind of is slightly contrary to all that.
It's a tricky one because obviously you have adoption as well. But I think it is the consistency, the continuity, the loving presence, that nurturing. I think there is a difference between mothering and fathering.
It's actually innate. It's very difficult for a mum to pretend to be a dad and a dad to pretend to be a mum. And it's very difficult to compensate for a non-biological link. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do our very best to cater for children who are being adopted, who haven't got access to their own parents. That's terribly sad. But all the evidence suggests, as much as we can possibly do, we should enable kids to be raised with their biological mum and dad, because that's evidence seems to be the thing that brings about the best outcomes for not only the children by a long way, but actually the mums and the dads and wider society. And what would you say if you were able to influence governments, and who knows if any of us are ever, but what would you say we need to do now as a group of people who feel this way to restore the confidence in parents of parenting and mothers of, your mothers are literally creating the next generation of human beings. They're literally leading to the future existence of womankind. It's an astonishing thing. And we seem to have put it on the back burner as something which, you're at home looking after your own children, are you? Is that all you can manage? And how do we change that? How do we get from where we are to a situation that might look at motherhood better?
Well, I think we've got to change, first of all, the narrative and the way, like you said, the way we perceive. So we quite often talk about childcare as a burden and children as obstacles to more important work. But actually, raising children is is very important work. It is the
Mm.
work. I suppose we understand a little bit more about child development and what I think Princess of Wales is doing that, isn't she? Sort of raising the profile of what it is, but she just value caring in general. And I think we're seeing this both in infancy, but also in old age. I think we've sort of lost any value for the importance of the sort of softer side. This idea of a burden of care is so strong in society,
Yeah,
and rather than it's not always a joy. It can be quite tough.
yeah, yeah.
It's not that, people are a burden on us.
Mm.
So we've kind of got to
Mm.
change that narrative as well.
But it's so different to the kind of push to atomize society. So actually, as soon as you've had your children, you go back to work, send the kids to wrap around childcare. Parents are off in a care home somewhere. Um, it's just, it's if you look around, it's not paying dividends. We don't seem to be a happier culture because of it. We don't seem to be doing better because of it. Everything seems to be falling apart. So, maybe we should look again and think, your message of your excellent organisation, Mothers at Home Meta, maybe that's important, and maybe we've lost that at a cost, and maybe we should go back and look at that again. Listen, Anne Fennell, it's absolute joy to talk to you. I think we should do more work together around pushing the government to go back and look at that together, because the evidence is very, very clear. It does make a huge difference. Keep up the great work, and thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.